My name is Monica Claridge. I'm the physical education teacher at East Elementary in Kodiak Island, Alaska, and I wrote a chapter about implementing mindfulness in PE called Improving Your Mental Game.
I'm Matt Dewar from Lake Forest High School, where I'm the well-being coordinator, and I wrote a chapter called Why Teacher Identity it was too long. Why Teacher Identity, Mindfulness, and Well-being Matter. Along those lines. It's a good chapter, even though I can't remember the title. Yeah.
Awesome. So Matt, tell me a little bit about like your day-to-day and your position as the wellness coordinator. What does that look like?
Good question. There's not really a day-to-day. It differs every day. I'm still in the classroom part-time, which is awesome because I don't want to fully leave the classroom. So every day does involve teaching. I still teach a senior philosophy course, which is a lot of fun. And the rest of the day then is divided between maybe doing mindfulness drop-ins, maybe doing organized mindfulness activities with maybe a specific department in the school, maybe meeting with teachers or students individually about their self-care or a mindfulness practice if they're interested in one. Also meet with instructional directors or department chairs about integrating SEL and mindfulness into coursework. That's actually taken up a lot of my time recently this year, which has been a lot of fun. But so teaching is the bread and butter, the daily bread and butter, that stays constant. And then the mindfulness stuff, you know, once you're up and running and you're attempting to achieve your goals, how that plays out in terms of the work just varies on a day-to-day basis. It's just chipping away where you need to chip away. How about you?
Excellent. Well, I'm in the gym every day, and so I get to teach PE all day and had the opportunity to slowly kind of integrate mindfulness practices into the gym. And it started out just with little mindful minutes at the end of the day where teachers were noticing that kids were coming back to their classrooms and in a better place and ready to learn. And then those teachers kind of mentioned that to the principal, and I had visited the idea of actually teaching like full mindfulness lessons with her initially, and when there was some more interest from the staff, we transitioned from just doing that to like mini mindfulness lessons in my PE classes. I have a nice advantage. I have my 2nd through 5th graders, I actually see 3 or 4 times a week. Okay. So I get a little amount of time where I can do that. So, and I've really tried to put like a sports twist onto it, relating it to athletics, and that world, which has been awesome to get the opportunity to give those skills to kids at a younger age, and then kind of starting to broaden to more school-wide stuff.
Is there a specific mindfulness activity that has most resonated with students or staff?
You know, I think the one that I have kids come back and tell me, Coach, I did this like outside of class, was the body scan. Which is interesting. They also will say, you know, like I was in a basketball game and I practiced my breathing to calm down. But a lot will say, I did the body scan and you know, I slept good last night. And then somebody else will chime in, oh, I tried it too. So.
Do you ever have anyone say that they practiced a body scan in the middle of a basketball game?
No, but maybe you would.
Just time out. We're gonna down-regulate here at half court.
I do show them the video. There's a little like 11-second clip of LeBron during one of the finals games of just like this. Really, just you could tell he is just breathing. He is practicing mindfulness and using those little things like that to tie it into sports. has really been beneficial for them to like see like, oh, it's not just something that coach is, sharing with us. Like professional athletes are doing it.
For sure.
I can do it too.
There's actually a really good, and it's even more salient now, video of Kobe Bryant talking about mindfulness and the importance of mindfulness in his own life as an athlete and as a person. And I've shown that to athletes as well. And it's funny how, as you said, when they see a superstar espousing the same thing you're talking about on a daily basis, like, oh, okay, now it's credible, right? Because they're saying it. But whatever works.
Yeah. Well, and it's interesting you mentioned that because that's another one of the videos that I show my kids, and also give them a couple quotes from Phil Jackson because he.
That was the book that got me started.
Yes.
Sacred Hoops. The bolts.
So awesome. But tell me about initially when you took on this role. You guys focused on the staff more, right?
For sure. It's my kind of philosophical belief, and lucky for me that I've found more and more that it's suggested by research as well, is that you have to build adult capacity in schools before you start focusing on kids. And even though we like to say that it's all about the kids, it's all for the kids, which is a sentiment that's great, I wouldn't disagree with that at all. If that is the target and that is the goal, then you will best serve them by investing first and maybe even most in the adults. Because when you fill them up and you charge up their batteries, they're then going to deliver, and those kids are going to be happy. And my school district is a destination school, meaning that when people show up there, they're there for 30 years or more. They don't, once you're there, you don't leave. And that speaks volumes about the kind of school district that we have. It's a great community in a great school. But that also means that teachers are the enduring culture. And we forget about that students come and go, parents come and go with them, administrators come and go. Teachers are the enduring culture. If you don't build their capacity, if you don't get them to buy in, good luck.
Yeah, so true.
It's so much more difficult to work around them. And then also with something like social emotional learning and mindfulness being an access point for SEL, the last thing you want is an adult teaching SEL or mindfulness who doesn't actually believe in it. There's nothing more painful to watch than someone who just doesn't feel it yet, who's being forced to implement it. And I think that's why it's so important to get buy-in, genuine buy-in. And even if that means you have to change your time frame and how aggressively you want an initiative to expand, then fine, adjust it. And go incrementally and slowly, because it's about starting with the people who are wanting to build capacity and then allowing that momentum to transfer forward. I sometimes use the analogy of, if you think of a freight train, the amount of energy that goes into getting that freight train to move that first inch. And once it's moving, it generates its own inertia. And I think school culture is similar, where if you put the energy into the right places, even though it might seem like change isn't happening quickly, just getting that authentic change to shift, the needle to shift a little bit, it'll start building up its own momentum. So yeah, definitely start with building adult capacity, and that's what we've done, and I think it's worked.
Awesome. Yeah, it seems like it's so important to when we have that present as educators, that kind of we can be co-regulators for the kids in the class. And if we're escalated and we're not embodying that, then it's the kids see it, they notice, they can tell, and we're not as authentic in our work.
Yeah. I work with high school students, so when you walk into the room, if you're off, they know it. They're immediately saying, "What's up? You in a bad mood today? What's going on? Someone make you mad, right? So they're very aware, and I like to use the analogy of pendulum clocks. That the man who discovered or created a pendulum clock, Christian Huygens, 400 years ago, found that when you put a bunch of pendulum clocks on the same wall, in time, their pendulums all sync to the same cadence.
Wow.
And it's this ongoing mystery of physics. They actually think they solved the mystery 2 years ago, that it's sound, that the sound waves or whatever, but they're not certain. But I think it's a wonderful analogy for teachers, that the teacher is the master pendulum, emotional pendulum of the room. And all the students, the young adults in the room, are calibrating their emotional pendulum to the pendulum of the teacher. And if that pendulum is off, then you have a classroom space that is either outright dysregulated or teetering on the edge of dysregulation all the time. And so you're right, it is important to have authentic buy-in. What are some of the, or have there been, obstacles to kind of doing the work in your particular community and school?
I think, like you said, it's important to get the teacher buy-in, and I think that's it has to be an organic process, like you said. So I haven't, currently the teachers aren't being expected to teach lessons because I'm teaching them on my own, and relaying information to them through staff meetings and stuff about what we're doing.
Yeah.
So, but eventually, the vision would be for them to be doing lessons too, potentially, if that's something that they're open to, or me coming into the classroom maybe in a different capacity.
Yeah.
And so that would be the whole process, like you were talking about. I have very open principal. The kids have been receptive to what we've been doing. But so I think that kind of would be the next step now, as broadening that perspective and really working with the teachers. I read Laurie Grossman's book, Master of Mindfulness, with my kiddos, and one of the pages talks about teachers can use mindfulness too, and so they don't yell and all these different kinds of things. And it's inevitably someone will say oh well, I had a teacher that didn't practice mindfulness, and it's oh.
In fact, this morning.
But so it just hammers home the point that we were just talking about, that it's really, truly, as much as I can share in my classroom, it needs to be a whole culture of a school.
Yeah.
To have the greatest impact. And like we were talking, Tovi was talking this morning of the importance of not having any of our interactions be traumatic in any way for a kid in that school environment. And so really, really being aware of what our triggers are and how we can regulate ourselves.
Yeah. It seems like more and more, as I'm a part of conversations around this work and get to meet awesome people like you along the way, it seems like if we really distill this work down to its essential kind of constituent parts, that it's really just an assertion that how we show up emotionally and connect is the precondition and context for all these other higher level human activities that we engage in. And so when we talk about school, it's well, we go to school to learn, and learning has become a cognitive practice. It's become largely discerning abstract symbols, right, of all the different disciplines and making meaning out of those in increasingly complex ways. But mindfulness and SCL are really saying the ability to do that effectively and successfully presupposes this background emotional foundation and context that allows people to enter into that space where they can learn, and that it makes so much sense, because emotions are so much older than even language, than our symbols for all the subjects, for diagramming sentences and calculus and all these things that are wonderful, but these are newer activities of the human brain, right? But these emotions are so deeply embedded, not only in human beings, but just going all the way back in time, from an evolutionary perspective, when you look at mammals just in general, that these emotions are the currency of life, and how easy it is for us to become dysregulated, to dysregulate others, to disrupt that emotional fabric, and it kind of prevents us then from achieving these higher end goals. And I'm rambling here, but I'm getting around to saying, I think a lot of times my experience has been that when people resist, they think SEL or mindfulness, they think they're a luxury. Like, I can't do that. It's a luxury. I've got these more important things to do. And I think what maybe they don't understand is that you can't actually do those things unless there is this SEL and mindfulness work that's already in place. And again, I'm kind of rambling, but I think a lot of times teachers mistake being compliant with learning. And just because a kid can fill out the worksheet the way you said to, or memorize the information the way you said, and whatever, that doesn't mean they're necessarily learning. That just means that a particular kid can be compliant and jump through the hoops you've given them, but the whole time they might be completely scared to talk, completely scared or incapable of accessing metacognition, reflection, or sharing their learning process with a peer in class. So there are all these aspects of learning, authentic learning, that might not actually be happening, but we think learning is going on just because the students are being compliant. So the gist is, in the same way someone thinks they're saving money by buying cheap food at the grocery store, right? You're just displacing the cost for a later time on the back end when you get sick. When teachers and educators say it's a luxury to indulge in SEL and mindfulness, you're just displacing the cost. You're throwing it on the back end, and it's just, I think, so important for educators to realize that.
It's critical. I mean, I think you're right. As I've learned and evolved as an educator too, it's if the kids don't feel safe, if they don't feel connected, then the learning isn't going to occur. And so you have to put the time and effort into working on yourself and then creating that environment so that the kids feel that. And then when you have that learning happens. And if the kids don't feel safe, don't feel connected, then they may be filling out the worksheet, but they're not, learning in a way that they can, and then they're also not in those higher states where they can really, really excel and succeed. And so ultimately, our job really, truly is, at the core, ourselves first.
Yeah.
And then putting the time into that SEL stuff. And it is hard when especially when there's all sorts of things looming, like state testing and things along those lines, to say, okay, I can take that time to do that. But it always, for me, has always, in the long run, everything ends up going smoother.
Yeah. Have you found that the more you've taken on this work as an individual, and the more you've done this yourself, that has transformed the way you connect to your students and the way your students connect to you? Absolutely.
It's, the more that I practice, and from over the time, from when I first started practicing to today, 8 years later, I can feel in myself that ability to pause. So, for example, something happens, and it's not an unsafe behavior, so it's not something that I necessarily have to stop, but noticing it and saying, okay, but what behavior do I want to see? And then noticing a friend who is displaying that behavior and say, like, I noticed that this individual is, sitting, and hands to self, waiting for the lesson to begin so that she knows what to do for the activity. That is helpful. And the kids want to be noticed.
Yeah.
And so the kid that, is going like this, poking his friend, is like, oh, we're supposed to have hands to self.
And self-corrects.
Okay, and self-corrects. And also times when there's things that are like personal triggers for me, and I notice, okay, why is what this kid is doing that's not so terrible bothering me so much? And can I step back from that and look at that and say, okay, it's something going on inside of me. It's not really that big of a deal. And to be able to take a breath and release it and let it go. And just being love in the classroom, like love in action, is like been ultimately my goal.
Yeah.
And when I do that and I'm really being aware that I'm having positive interactions with my kids, the way that I interact with them is positive and not causing any further trauma, and really noticing that any behaviors or things that they have going on, it's not, why did this kid do that, but what happened to you?
Yeah.
And how can I help? And that has truly transformed like my relationship and connection with kids.
That's awesome.
Have you felt the same with how your practice progressing and how that's impacted your career?
Yeah, I think for me, what has most changed, or what's been most beneficial, is that I think sometimes in teaching, it's a social practice, which means we can easily default into social roles. I am teacher, you are student, and the depth of SEL in a room is in proportion to the extent, well, not entirely, but SEL in a room requires that we break those roles. And that we can meet. Martin Buber, who's an existentialist, talks about the ridge, and the ridge being like the ridge of a mountain, right? Mountain ridge. And he uses it as an analogy of the place where people can meet authentically as human beings. And when you're standing on the ridge, it's so easy to fall back. It's a very tenuous space, right? Standing on the ridge. And so when I read that years ago, I thought, that's such a beautiful analogy for what goes on in a classroom. That can you meet your students on the ridge, human being to human being? And I think for me, practicing has allowed me to see that I am human. It's allowed me to develop a relationship with myself beyond maybe the roles I identify with externally in my life, and see that there's a common humanity that's in all those roles, and that's me, right?
Yeah.
And I think I think Joseph Campbell said, what is most personal is most universal.
Powerful.
And when you practice, you get in touch with that personal essence of who you are in the process of becoming, and with all its limitations and shortcomings and imperfections. And when you navigate that space within yourself, you're able to meet people there, your students there as well. And I think a lot of teachers sometimes think when they're stuck in that role dichotomy that they have to fulfill the ideals of the role, be perfect, always know the answer, be in control, all of those things. And SEL and mindfulness can be threatening because it threatens the idealized nature of that role, right? It's saying, no, you're leading with your humanity, not your perfect adherence to this idea. And so for me, in that way, it's been super beneficial, where I feel more and more I can be, that who I am as a teacher is actually who I am. It's not me playing the role of a teacher. It's me being a teacher.
Yeah.
And that's been, I think, really the most powerful part of it.
It's awesome. And kids can sense that.
Yeah, I think they can.
They absolutely can.
Yeah. What?
Awesome.
So as we close here,
Yeah.
I feel like, should we drink our water?
Let's drink
I mean,
water.
it's just sitting here. We'll drink
We
it.
should
So we're
drink
going
our
down the final stretch. Let's drink. Be refreshed here. Would you like an orange?
I was actually thinking about juggling.
Has anyone drank out of the water yet today?
Well, I get new fresh water.
Every time? Every time? But are we the first to actually utilize the water?
Oh, no.
Oh.
People end with raising a glass.
Cheers.
Oh. Okay.
Awesome.
The fruit is lovely too. It's good.
Yeah.
It's real.
Should we finish up with a little talk about the book real quick? Just
Sure. It is there, and that's why we're here.
It is here. It is
We've
here.
successfully managed to not talk about it at all to this point.
Well, for me, it's been a really great opportunity being a part of this collaboration to get to see so many other perspectives of all these little components that go into the education of a student as a whole.
Yeah.
And so to have like real life, stories from people across all different aspects of education is really powerful, and to be able to compile that kind of into one piece. So it's a powerful stuff with incredible people like you sharing their knowledge.
Thank you. Yeah. And likewise, the book is it's so cool because as I'm sure as you started in this work, when I started in this work, you can sometimes feel like you're alone in the wilderness of your school and your community.
Yeah.
And for anyone who's watching, who might be on the very front end of this journey, this is a book of companions and journeys that have already started to be navigated, and it's in their own voice and words the distilled insights and perspectives of what they've learned along the way. And so on the front end, I'm sure you would have loved, and I would have loved to have had something like this, where you're like, wow, I'm not crazy, right? I'm not the only one doing this. And so it's kind of I think the book can be a North Star of sorts, helping people kind of guide and calibrate and navigate their journey through the stories of others who are also walking the path. And that's what I also love is the story, the narrative basis of the book, that it's not bogged down in research jargon. And don't get me wrong, I love the research and I can geek out on all that, right? But there's so much of that. Like, how many times can we talk about the amygdala and downrating the amygdala and the prefrontal cortex? It's like, okay, we get it, right? It helps the brain, we know.
Yeah.
But what is not redundant is the lived experience and stories of people in real time trying to figure out what this project of mindfulness means, and what it can mean for schools and for students, and even for communities. So buy the damn book.
It's been a pleasure, Matt.
It has.
So much. Enjoyed it.